I'm really excited to be speaking to Marc Gutman, my good friend, serial entrepreneur. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for years. We've had some amazing experiences together, and I am really excited to learn about Wildstory. So can you tell us a little bit about who Wildstory is?
Absolutely. I mean, pleasure to be talking with you as well, Keith. Love our conversations always. We've done a lot of awesome things together. But Wildstory is the marketing agency for the arts, recreation, and entertainment companies. And we're dedicated to helping companies who provide refreshment of strength and spirit after our workday build powerful customer experiences that delight and create differentiation. And we are really, I am on a mission to help the world après. And what that means to me is après is obviously the French word for after. A lot of times here in Colorado, we associate it with après skiing, but really what it means to me, it's like after that work day. And, we work hard, we all have careers, but in my outlook, in my perspective, we really do it so that we can enjoy those moments that matter, that typically happen after our workday. So whether that's having a meal with family and friends, whether that is getting out on the slopes, whether that is going to a climbing gym, whether that's going out in an RV, the list is endless. But for me, really, we're all about the après, and we're so just excited to be working with companies that also believe in that mission as well. So most of the clients that we work with have that same outlook. They are focused on purpose, lifestyle, and their own mission, and just helping us all make a better world. One of my favorite quotes came from a gentleman we both know, the co-founder of Priceline, Jeff Hoffman, and he likes to say that entrepreneurship isn't the purpose, it's the tool, and I really believe that. And so using what we're doing here to build brands as tools to change the world and make people's lives better after the workday, that's what we're all about.
Amazing, man. Can you tell me, how do you define a branding, brand strategy, and brand storytelling?
So it's a great question, and it's a super confusing kind of discipline. And brand and branding, it's a relatively young discipline, and it's really hot right now. And I'll talk about why it's really hot, but it's evolving, and so there's a lot of confusion around these words. And for me, the definition of a brand is not your logo, it's not your corporate identity, it's not your product. It's not even a promise. A lot of people say a brand is a promise, and it's certainly not all the impressions that you make across your company or brand. But really, the definition that I like to go by is that it's a gut feeling that someone has about your products or services. And it's a gut feeling because we are crazy, emotional, intuitive creatures as humans, right? Like, we are not logical. We like to think that we're logical, but we're not. We're emotional. And it becomes a gut feeling because also as business owners, we have this misconception that we control the brand, and we don't. Our customers control the brand. It's created by the customers. And so it's created and owned by the customers, not the company, not our brand teams, not an agency. Like, that's a crazy concept to me to think about. Even when I sit in this every day and I think about what is a brand, the idea that we work on brands, that we don't really control it. We do our best to create a brand. We do our best to influence what a brand is, but we don't actually control or own it in the truest sense. And why brands even exist is because people use brands to simplify buying choices. We're living in this crazy world, and I'll talk about that a little later, where we just have infinite choice. And so we don't know how to categorize all that information. And brands really exist to help us simplify buying choices. And kind of back to the idea of a brand isn't what you say it is, but what the outside world say it is. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world. So I take him as an authority on this topic. And he's super customer centric. He's all about customers. I really value his outlook on things. And he says that a brand is simply, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And if you think about that for a second, that's a super, super easy definition. Whether that's a personal brand, right? What are people saying about you and I, Keith, when we're not in the room? Or what are they saying about our company? And that's really when people are speaking their truth. People will tell you that they love your company or love what you're doing or that they need you. But really, it's about when you're not around and what they're saying about you, that's the true testament of your brand. And so branding is an extension of that. And branding is simply a process that is designed to create a business strategy that outmaneuvers your competition. Say that again, but branding to me is a process that is designed to create a business strategy that outmaneuvers your competition. And then brand storytelling, you ladder up to that, that becomes the ongoing telling of your brand. That's most often the telling of the story of your customer. So, and when we tell that story of our customer, that should be told with them as the hero of the story. Like thinking, and one of the, we have 10 Wildstory brand principles, how to become a Wildstory brand. But one of them is make them, your customer, the hero of the story. And so when we think about it, how do we make the customer the hero of their own life story when using our products and services? So like, how do I make Keith a hero? How do I, like in the story of his own life, when he's out there telling his friends, if you're my target customer, that's what I'm really thinking about. And then brand storytelling just becomes this communication tool and methodology of how do we continue to tell that story over and over again with consistency, but variety. So that's an interesting concept, right? Like how are we consistent, but have variety, both internally to our employees, so we can build a strong culture. How do we tell that story to our stakeholders and our investors so that they believe in our mission and help us getting to where we want to go to achieve our vision? And then obviously externally to our existing customers and then to enroll, right? Because I really believe the purpose of what we're trying to do with all this, with branding, brand storytelling, is not so much to sell people. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, we want people to buy our products. That's what we need them to do. But the effective way to do that for the long term and to have people buying from us again and again is to enroll them in our brand and enroll them in our community. And that's how you can do that through brand storytelling.
Very cool, man. I've never looked at branding like chess before, but the way that you explained it is outmoving your competition and sort of looking 7 moves ahead. It's a really interesting analogy. I like that a lot. With that in mind, why does brand matter?
Yeah, and another great question. Like I touched on this just a little bit, but our purchasing choices have multiplied dramatically. Like back in the day, there was one TV, 2 types of computers, like you, when you wanted lettuce, you went and got lettuce. And I just thought of that right now. Like when you buy lettuce, you can buy like from Costco, you can buy organic, you can buy it delivery. I mean, even lettuce has a million choices. I mean, think about when you go to buy toothpaste or soap. Like, how do you know? Deodorant. Those are just some consumer packaging products, but like it's limitless, right? Water bottles, right? Like, how do we pick the water bottle that we want to use, and so we have too many choices and we are time starved. Like, I don't know about you, but the one thing I don't have enough of is time, and so I have too many choices, too little time. Everything kind of looks the same. Right now, like I'm shopping for a new car. Like, I don't know, like I'll get to this in a second, but like what I'm going to choose on is brand, not features, not engine size. It's going to be like what I think makes me feel coolest, what fits into my own personal vision of who I am as a person here in Colorado. And so everything just kind of feels the same. I mean, even look at Samsung and Apple, their phones do the exact same thing. So really what we're buying is a brand based on our own, how it, makes us see, ourselves within that product. We're enrolling, as I mentioned before, ourselves in their culture, their vision, their why. And so we also tend to buy our buying decisions based on trust. And the data shows that people tend to judge companies 10% by what they say. So I can tell you I'm awesome. I can tell you I'm great, but they judge a company 60% by how they appear. Now, I just want you to take a moment and think about I'm looking around my office right now. I'm looking at things I've purchased. I mean, I think that is 100% true. I buy things based on how they appear. Again, back to that car analogy, that's probably 90% of my decision as I'm shopping for a new car right now. And so in absence of like all the data and the info and how to slice and dice and really figure out what is right for us, consumers, us, we take cues from like symbolic attributes, logos, tribal allegiances. How does that product make me feel? Who will I be if I join this brand? Will I be an athlete? Will I be an outdoorsman? Will I be a fashionista? Will I be like a super cool, like style guy, right? Like, will I be, all these different things. So will it show that I have good taste? Will it show that I'm a good chef? All these different things. And so we're not so much buying a brand, as I mentioned, but we're joining a tribe, we're joining a community, a movement, we're enrolling in a brand. And so they form a gut feeling about what a brand will deliver and what that experience that they're expect is gonna have. And so what does this all mean? Look, we're time starved, we rely heavily on trust. If you don't believe me, I mean, our whole economy is based on trust, right? The stock market, the trust in the gold-backed monetary system, trust in crypto. I mean, we are like, it's just a big story that we're all trusting in, buying into. And so our customers, they have expectations for things that they buy, and that's a form of trust. And really the formula for trust when it comes to brand and is quite easy and simple. Trust equals reliability plus delight. Trust equals do what you say you're going to do, deliver what you say you're going to deliver, right? You have to do that. But then you need to delight customers. You need to stand out. You need to do more for customers. I mean, think about experiences you might have had where a simple email delighted you, where a brand came and said, hey, we're either going to refund you, we're going to send you a new product, we're going to just own that we made a mistake. Like any time that you get that little bit of delight or that you're unexpected, anytime a brand makes you feel like the best version of you, that's delight. And so that's trust. We just, now that's very easy to lay out there. That's a very easy formula for brand. Not always easy to achieve. And so that's the standard that we're moving towards. And when you have trust, it quickens the buying decision. And as we all know, trust is very hard to earn, but easy to lose. So that's what we're trying to do with a brand.
Interesting. Man, it's so much deeper than I've thought of a brand. I mean, I've definitely heard the brand is not a logo, but this is really getting to, I think, the root of what a brand is. How does brand strategy integrate with this? Why is brand strategy so essential?
Yeah, and I think, just kind of to address what you just, were talking about, I grew up thinking a brand was a logo. I grew up thinking it was your colors and an insignia. But, I'm not a designer. And so I came at this from my own perspective. Like I'm in love with words and I'm in love with feelings and emotion and empathy. And so that's just kind of how I came to it and came to, through the research and through my own discovery, realizing this is what brand was. And I think it's very common for people to think that it's a logo. And by the way, I'm going to talk about brand strategy, but great strategy doesn't really work if you don't have great design, and vice versa, right? So a great brand strategy without great design is going to kind of fall flat. Great design without great strategy will do the same. And so it's taken me a really long time to learn. And that's why I mentioned that I come from words, because I want, we all kind of put forth in the world that which we want to believe or that which we are good at. I'm good at words. I'm like, it's all strategy. But, I want to point out that you do need great design to support that strategy because, visually, that's often a lot of times what we see first in a brand. But really simply put, to me, brand strategy, as you mentioned, and we talked about in the beginning, it is this idea that brand strategy is simply the process of outmaneuvering your competition. And who doesn't want to do that, right? When you do it right and you get into it, it's really your business strategy. And I think this is where, brand is such this early discipline. It's still evolving. You can't really go to school for branding. It's kind of the subdivision of marketing. There's very few places where you can get brand certified through education. But it really is your business strategy. And so the great thing about this, it's hard work. And I don't want to act like it's not hard work. We can talk about the process a little bit later. But when you are fortunate to land on your strategy, it's really not about big changes, but only small corrections. And I have this, and I need to remind myself of that all the time. I have this great little photo on my wall here from a client we've worked at, Airstream, and the founder, Wally Byam, is this super famous, iconic guy. And obviously Airstream is about to turn 100 years old, and they have that iconic camper shell. And so I take, he's had a brand that endures. I think he's pretty much an expert on this topic, but I'm looking at it right now. His quote says, "Let's not make changes, only improvements." So his thought was that once you have a great design or strategy, and by the way, strategy is just design. I think a lot of times we get caught up in this idea that design is art, that it's a logo, but you can design products, you can design businesses. Design thinking is such a malleable kind of methodology that you can use it to design messaging. Like when I use the word design, it's interchangeable with words, with business, with strategy, and of course, the creative, the visual. But anyways, I think Wally, let's not make changes, only improvements. Wally Byam from Airstream, that applies perfectly when you nail your brand strategy.
Amazing. Well, I want to work with you. I'm sold. Like how I need brand help with, even going back 23 years, I wish I'd had this at Zen Man. Everything's evolved so much, but Oak, my new company, would be amazing. If I wanted to work with you, what do I get? What's the value, the takeaways, deliverables, outcome? What's the process of working with Wildstory?
Yeah, and the process is I am very big on co-creation. And so there's some agencies that just, you get an intake form, they go away, they come back and they say, here's your brand. And that's not really how I work. It's really about co-creation. We have multi-day work sessions where we're working with leadership teams to really suss out the essence of the brand. But the outcome, in a weird way, is the thinking, because that's the really hard stuff, and the deliverable becomes this articulation of your brand, which is typically found in answering 8 really simple questions. So this is where it's a little bit deceiving, because I'm gonna go through these questions, and they're not hard questions, but they're hard to answer sometimes. And so in no particular order, the 8 questions, number 1 is, who are we here for? So who do you serve? Who's your customer? Really getting clear on that. Why are we here? What is your purpose? What are you here to do beyond making a dollar? What do we do? Which is usually typically easy. Hey, we are a branding firm. We sell alarm clocks. We sell water bottles. And how do we do it? What is our process? So, with the Oak Journal, how is your journal different than another journal, because you have a different process? What's our backstory? I find out so much about a company when they share their backstory. Often there's 3 reasons why a company has been founded. It's either inspiration, desperation, or frustration. And why was this business started? What's our vision? So people buy today with a shared vision of the future tomorrow, right? Or that people buy today a positive shared vision. And so what's the vision? What's the vision of the business? What makes us different? Okay. Got to be unique. It's got to be something different. Why do I buy Oak Journal versus another journal? What do we value the most? This becomes about core values, your beliefs. What do you stand for? And then what's our personality? So what's the personality of the brand? Because brands are like people. They have personalities. They need to live. And oh my gosh, in today's, content-driven brand landscape, if you don't have a personality, you're really, really in trouble. People expect that. No longer do people want IBM, right? Let me back off that statement. Some people do want IBM, but a business doesn't have to be super corporate all the time. It should have a personality, especially in my space, where I'm working with brands that connect. And that, I think that's something really to understand. And that comes back to, number 1, who's our customer? What do they expect? Do they want corporate? A lot of times in your bank, you do. But, there's a lot of new banks, like SoFi comes to mind, and some other ones that are trying to, attract a younger, hipper demographic. And so they're much different. Or Progressive and Flow is the cool insurance company. Prudential's the rock, and they're the serious company. They still do the same thing, and it's really about branding. And so these are the inputs. These are the 8 questions. Pretty easy questions, you'd think, right? But they take time. They're deceptively simple. And so when we take this, we're able to take these inputs and then ladder them up, use them as the lens for, creating the story about the brand, ongoing messaging. And this becomes the foundational strategy. And you can see why it's strategy. It's like, who are our customers? Well, that's a big strategic decision. That's a business decision. That's not a color decision. Why are we here? Big stuff. What's our vision for the future? Where are we going with this brand? What makes us different? These are all like big strategic business questions. These are not logo questions.
Well, I mean, you laid it out like it was simple, but I have a feeling there's something tricky about all this. I mean, all of these individual concepts make sense, but it doesn't sound simple.
Yeah, in some ways it is. In some ways it's not. I mean, we're complex people. And what I can say is when I work with every brand, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of excavating, a lot of unearthing of all this information to get down to something really clear and concrete. One of my, I love quotes. One of my other favorite quote is attributed to Mark Twain, although I've recently done some research and it may not be Mark Twain, but, and it's famous where he says, if I had had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. And so the idea that it's really hard to be succinct and simple. And so what's tricky about this is less is more. So how do we take everything about a brand? How do we take everything about a company, all those 8 questions that I just outlined, and how do we succinctly communicate that, because less is truly more? Yeah. And I will argue it's way easier to create a 60-page brand book. It just takes time, right? Like it's just labor. Than it is to create a concise 1-page brief that communicates everything you need to know about a brand. And, marketing teams, they have time for a 60-page brand book. But everyone else in the organization, who, by the way, branding is the responsibility of everybody. Right. The CEO should own it, in my opinion, or a chief brand officer, because it is business strategy. But the actual telling of the story, the actual goals, because this is business strategy, is the responsibility of everybody in the organization, and everybody on the leadership team has ownership of a component of the brand and on how that brand affects the business. And so they need like a 1-sheet, a 2-sheet, a 3-sheet kind of thing, right? Like that's all they have the aptitude for. And that is not easy. That is hard. And so what's tricky is that this is sort of like the fuzzy stuff. This is the stuff that is sometimes hard to quantify. This is the stuff that is like, takes time to unearth. This is the blocks we have. This is the little bit of the psychiatry and the cultural anthropology. And so excavating that, unearthing that, just like anything we do in our business is a little tricky. And it usually just helps to have a professional, someone who's done it a lot, a facilitator who can also keep you moving, right? Like half my job when I facilitate work sessions is just keeping people moving, because we can get stuck on one of those questions for days, weeks, months. We like to talk about it. It's big stuff. We feel passionate about it, and we got to keep it moving. And it's a lot of times my job to recognize where the nuggets are coming from, what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah. I could definitely see how that would happen, where you get in a room of type A's and they could just go on one core value and tweaking that for a 12-hour session. I think another thing that would definitely be, and I know is amazing having done some work with you, is, your background in script writing, the work that you do in words, I think makes it just what you distill down really valuable. But you mentioned something earlier about, I think it was like the 10 principles that made up a Wildstory brand, and you mentioned one of them, but what are the 10 principles that make up a Wildstory brand?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a ton of research. We've worked with, hundreds of companies, and over time have really distilled for us what is a Wildstory brand. And a Wildstory brand is one that is, going to stand out above all the rest. It's one that's going to have loyal fans. It's one that's going to be a leader in their industry, and it's one that's going to be around for the long haul. So think about like brands like Airstream and things like that. I mean, my goal is that every brand that we work with has a 100-year run rate. And and we'll get to actually the last principle, and that's not easy, so I want you to hold that, like principle number 10 and how you get to 100 years. But yeah, so we have 10 principles. The first one, and we've kind of talked a little bit about this today, is it must start with strategy, right? We have to start with strategy. So if someone comes to me and says, I just need a ... By the way, that's our first red flag. We don't work with anyone that says, I just need a ... or believes that they just need a logo, or they just need a video, or they just need some color. Now, that's the way they might come to us, and we'll slow it down and say, well, what's the real problem you have? You think you want a logo, but what they tell us is that they need to communicate better, that they're misunderstood, that they want to be seen as a premium brand, and right now they're not. Okay, well, that's a different conversation. So we kind of start, hey, with this logo conversation, but has to come back to strategy. We start with strategy because Wildstory brands understand that brand is their business strategy. The second principle is you have to find your purpose or your why. And this is becoming less of an issue. I mean, right now, if you go to, 5 years ago, like people were like, I don't want to spend time on my purpose or my why, or how does that connect to my business? But if you go to Pepsi's latest annual report, they open all about with purpose, not about selling soda. If you go to SoftBank, the largest, one of the largest investment companies in the world, who used to be just about money, it's all about purpose and what they're trying to do beyond making a dollar. So your purpose is this amazing thing that forces people to choose. It's part of your story, right? And they either choose you or they don't choose you. But it's this amazing kind of, let's put our cards on the table right away, and you either choose me or you don't choose me. That's great. We want to know. We want to know who's with us, and we want to know who's not with us. So Wildstory brands force people to choose. The third principle is culture equals brand. Wildstory brands know that their culture equals their brand, and that you can't have a great external brand without a really strong culture. And so that they know that inspiration comes from the inside out, that our people are representative of our brand, that we're if you're a solo person, that you're the representative, that culture equals brand. The fourth Wildstory principle is après. We talked about this. The Wildstory brands believe in the power of après. It's our mission to help those brands that focus on the refreshment of strength and spirit after the workday. So that what are we doing after work to really to really make moments that matter. And so a Wildstory brand typically believes in the importance of this as well. Principle number 5: manifestos. A Wildstory brand has a manifesto, and a manifesto is simply put, it's just a declaration of what you believe, and it's putting it out there. And it's, Wildstory brands declare what they stand for to the world. You can go read ours, all about this idea behind après and what it means to us, and what we're going to fight for and what we're going to fight against, which is so important. I did a webinar on this. We can link to it later in the video. You can, spend an hour learning all about how to build a manifesto. But in that webinar, there's a quote from Luke Sullivan, who wrote a really famous book called Hey Whipple, Squeeze This. It's a famous advertising book with a great title, by the way. And his quote on a manifesto is, a manifesto is your brand's Magna Carta. It's your Rosetta Stone. A declaration of independence all rolled into one. It's the halftime locker room speech given by the CEO, the words the founder heard on the mountaintop before bringing down the stone tables. Reading a great brand manifesto should make you want to run out and try the product. You should feel the brand fire in your bones. Right? So that's what we're trying to do with the manifesto. And once you're able to get clear and laser focus on a manifesto, you're well on your way to being a Wildstory brand. Number 6, make the customer the hero. So Wildstory brands make the customer the hero of their own story when using your product or service. And when you do this right, you get this amazing effect where a customer says, I am a fill in the blank with your name, your brand person, right? So I am a Jeep person. I am a Harley Davidson person. I am a Whole Foods person. I am an Oak Journal person. So that's what we're trying to do, but make the customer the hero of the story when using your product or service. That's number 6. Number 7, I'm really bad at fingers. Number 7 here, ask what if. You need to take chances when we go through the process. You need to be open to the unknown. You need to be open to going to other kind of places that maybe you hadn't seen before we started the branding process, where there might be opportunity, where we might unearth or uncover some real true essence that maybe you didn't know existed. Dare to be different. Great brands stand out, and in a great idea, you know how you know an idea is like a really great idea? A lot of times it scares the hell out of you, you know? And so venture into the unknown, you know, set a crazy goal, set a crazy BHAG, use that Oak Journal to get there. But, you know, like venture into the unknown and also realize that the journey from not knowing to knowing, that's the work. That's the magic. That's what's really exciting. The journey from not knowing to knowing is the work. Number 8, be extraordinary. We don't need another copycat brand. We don't need another ... You know, don't need another Apple. We don't need another Warby Parker. We don't need another. I'm just kind of looking around my office for inspiration here. We don't need another Tesla. Like what we need to be is extraordinary. Tesla is Tesla. They're extraordinary, right? Don't be them. You know, don't be a copycat brand. That's boring and lame. Be extraordinary. Be your own brand. Content. So kind of, you know, in that hierarchy of we go with brand, branding, brand storytelling. Once you've got your brand strategy, your creative assets, the real work begins, and that's brand storytelling. And there's something really magical about sharing your story and the story of your customer that builds that trust we talked about, that builds communities, which is a secret to a long-term thriving business. You know, Airstream, yes, they have an iconic design, but a lot of people are out there saying, I am an Airstream person, you know, and I'm in the Airstream community. And Wildstory brands know that by telling customers who we are, it tells them who they are. I want you to think about that for a second. When Nike tells the world we're all about athletes, when I enroll in Nike's brand, it tells me I'm an athlete. When Apple tells the world we think different and we're for the crazy ones, when I enroll in their brand, I'm thinking different. I'm a crazy one. And so that's really cool, right? Like we have this really cool opportunity to do that. And number 10, we're almost at the end here. Number 10, principle of being a Wildstory brand, never stop branding, right? Brands are like people. We're always growing. We're always evolving. We're always entering a new phase of life, whether it's startup, whether we need to refresh. Like Airstream has gone through multiple iterations of their brand story. They have to. You have to adjust to the world around you. Now, that doesn't mean that you change your core beliefs. That doesn't maybe mean that you change like the vision you have for the world. But what it does mean is that you adapt, that you evolve, just like as we do as people. Like what I wanted when I was 16 certainly isn't what I want today. And that doesn't make either version less wrong. Same thing with a brand. So, you know, that's why this is an ongoing process. This is not a set it and forget it. You don't go out, do the brand work, get a logo, set it, forget it. You're always branding. You're always building the value of your brand.
Wow, that's cool. If you think of some brands, maybe like a Blockbuster that could have used some of this insight to help with some strategy at some essential times, which, you know, being such a huge company, how do you quantify that? How do you measure the value of the brand? I mean, Blockbuster is an interesting example. Blockbuster and Netflix, I mean, it was just overnight, one became the other, but if I'm not one of these giant brands, or I don't have a disruptor like a Netflix or an Uber or an Airbnb changing my industry, how do I measure the value of my brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked all the time. And, you know, as I mentioned, it's kind of like this fuzzy thing that's different, you know, and there are some, you know, there are brand valuation lists out there. I think Interbrand's one of the ones that is the most popular. You can go download for free and see like the world's most 100 valuable brands, and they have a whole way of doing it. But I think, you know, for companies that are maybe a little smaller, not going to be on the Interbrand list or something like that, there's basically 5 ways that you can measure the value. And I think the first and most important is a price premium, right? Like, how do we get the highest price possible for our products or services? You know, like only one competitor in any given market can be the cheapest. For all the rest, there's branding. You know, like only one person can play the price game. You know, who doesn't want to command a higher price? Who doesn't want to get more for their products and services? So that's number 1. Customer preference, right? Like, so are you preferred X amount of percentage over the competitor? Like, you know, are you the leader in the category? Typically that's branding. You know, Coca-Cola, they have a customer preference model where most people prefer Coke. Is it better than Pepsi? You can argue that, you know, but it's their competitors, and there you go. Tesla, right? They're the customer preference for cars, for electric vehicles, I'm sorry. Replacement costs. I love this one because you and I are always kind of thinking about different businesses, we're spinning up different businesses. So how much would it cost the brand to build it again from scratch? Like to get to where you are today. And so if you think about any established, could you build an Airstream from scratch today? People are trying every day. There's competitors every day. I don't know what it costs, but I'm thinking it's billions, So when you're thinking about buying or selling a brand, this can also really be applicable. For bigger companies, stock price. So as I mentioned, we are, most of the stock market, especially what we're seeing today, is all based on a shared vision of what we think the brand is going to do in the future, not what the actual value is. It's crazy, like you look at the market cap of so many different brands, and then future earnings. This becomes real with valuation. If you have a company value your business, what kind of multiple are you getting based on what they think your brand, the brand value is of your company. So those are 5 ways that you can easily measure brand value. And that is a direct reflection of your brand. There's a lot of other studies too, where they, for bigger companies like Coca-Cola, for like a Tesla, they actually would say what the market cap would be without the brand influence and impact, and what it is with the brand. And you can, we can, link to those, or you can look for those on the internet, but those are pretty interesting too. But again, I'm not a Tesla owner in terms of I don't own the company, so it doesn't, that doesn't affect me as much as some of these others.
Interesting. The replacement cost, I love having this different lens than just looking at a multiplier of EBITDA, right? Based on your industry. So super, super interesting, man. What does your process look like? What is the Wildstory process?
Yeah, it's, really based on 3 pillars of culture, brand, and content. And, what we've identified is that those 3 things are really the life cycle of a brand. They really impact the overall business and the business strategy. As I mentioned, we co-create, we prefer to co-create. And so we go into work sessions. I don't call them meetings. They are definitely work sessions where we are co-creating with a small group of leaders within a business. Typically starts off with either a discovery or a strategy session, depending on where you are in your life cycle as a business. And then we get into, through those work sessions, we get into developing the brand, answering the 8 questions. Who are we here for? Who you serve? Why are we here? What do we do and how do we do it? What's our backstory? What's our vision? What makes us different? What do we value the most? And what's our personality? And then we go ahead and we just start to use that to develop core and targeted messaging concepts, which then we go and we take what we've learned from there, and we'll typically make what we call stylescapes, which are 3 kind of mood boards of visual direction so that we can really work with a client on that. We like to do a mild, medium, and a spicy version so that we can kind of, hey, this is kind of by the book. This is where we think maybe you should be. And then spicy is, hey, this is if we take a chance, this is what it might look like. And this is we're really pushing what the visual will look like. And we move into taking everything we've learned. And the reason we do that messaging and stuff is because then we can get into the visual design phase and start in the creative and start to test that, and start to see how does that lay out visually? Does that work with the logo concepts that we're working? And they're kind of working like this, So if we start to get onto something visually that maybe isn't supporting what we came up with verbally, we can kind of go back and tweak it a little bit so that it all works. Because, we want it to ultimately, work really nicely together. And so, as I mentioned, we get into that design because without great design, great strategy falls flat. So we want to make sure that those complement each other. Once we get all the assets, we usually deliver logo, typography, color palettes, photography guidelines, iconography, signage, badges, email templates, like your decks, your newsletters, your social. And, and that can come in a variety of different deliverables. For smaller clients, that just might be, hey, here's your digital files. For a little bit of larger clients that need a toolkit and need to have everyone on the same page, I can go to style guides, brand books, brand briefs, other assets. And once we have that toolkit, and by the way, that we can have a 1-page style guide and logos, which works for a lot of people. That's how we started our company. We did logos and a 1-page style sheet. We didn't need to spend a ton of money, but then as over time we start to build a brand book with kind of outlining, articulating the brand story, who are we, some history, brand guidelines, especially if you're like a company that's really into a lot of content creation. A lot of times those brand toolkits will have guidelines for, emails and, video and all sorts of stuff, right? So just depending on how big your organization is, you need more. And we'll deliver, that story and the voice, tone, look and feel of the brand. Like I said, it could be a 60-page brand book one-page style guide or brand brief, social media Bible. A lot of times, if you're big on that, like how do we sound? What do we talk like? Sample posts. It's really hard kind of organizing all that stuff to make sure that it's consistent. We have people out there communicating. And as we've all seen, things can get sideways very, very quickly if someone communicates in the wrong way or the wrong tone. So we go out of our way to make sure that never happens. And then the real work begins. We move into the doing and telling, that brand storytelling phase, that content phase. And one of the biggest outcomes of our entire process, besides everything I mentioned, is just this roadmap for what a business should do next with regards to their content. Everyone has different customers showing up. Everyone has different customers, and showing up where they are and how they want to be talked to is really, really important. And so there's this kind of weird message out there that you got to be everywhere. You got to do all these things. You got to have a podcast, a video channel, YouTube, be on Insta, be on LinkedIn. Well, that's just not true, Like, you need to be where your customers are. And in my opinion, you need to be really good at one or two things. So be like really, if you think your customers are on a podcast, be awesome at that. You think your customers are really going to be on Instagram? Great. Be awesome at that. And we can help you out with that and what that looks like. Once you get really, really awesome at that, maybe after 6 months, a year, then you can start adding other things to your content. And by the way, once you get really awesome at that, you can start reusing that content in different ways. But if you're, I'll give ourselves an example. Like I'm the primary content creator here at Wildstory. I'm really good at writing, and I've dabbled in YouTube, I wouldn't consider necessarily this YouTube, like doing more kind of curated YouTube videos. I've dabbled in all sorts of different things. And like what I found is like, I'm just not really that good at YouTube because you got to edit it, you got to produce it. I love the format, but like it's draining on our business. And so the areas that we really focus on are writing on our blog, thought leadership. And then we take that and we can cobble that and start so for example, I just wrote a thought leadership piece called Start With Who. And it was all about putting your customers first, And so that started as a blog post. I then turned to that, some of the gems that I thought were gems that I had written in that blog post into a 10-slide carousel, posted that at Instagram. That visual, I just export those 10 slides into one big JPEG, right? Telling that whole story. That becomes a LinkedIn post. I'm not really on LinkedIn. I just kind of show up there, but that's not my focus. But why I do that is, hey, I've got this content anyways. People on LinkedIn haven't seen it, but I'm not designing this content for LinkedIn per se. Maybe the message that I post will be like a little more business oriented, but I'm just making it work for me. But really where I'm focused is writing, Instagram carousels, and then, as you know, our Baby Got Backstory podcast, because those are the things that I'm good at, that I get energy from, and then are easy, and that's where my customer shows up. So that's like, you got to be real, you got to be there, and you got to be, really thoughtful about A, what can you accomplish, and B, where your customers, and then thinking about how your customer is going to interact with us at every step of our customer journey, right? So customers, come in from awareness stage, an interest stage, a purchase stage, a repeat purchase, and then finally, hopefully they become like a recommender or a raving fan. And how they interact with us is very different in terms of content. And we need to map that out. We need to be very intentional about that and thinking about how we need to adjust our conversation. Obviously, someone who loves your brand, you're not going to talk to them the same way that someone that knows nothing about you. Much like a person in your life, you have different intimate conversations with those people that love you and are in your life versus someone who you just meet at a cocktail party and just trying to get to know you, and they're open to it, but how do you talk to them? And so from there, how can we adjust our conversation, our verbal and visual conversation, to meet and exceed customer expectations? And then how do we just build a content plan built based on all that with articles, video, interactive content? As I mentioned, how do we build that content plan so that we take your thing you're strongest at, and then make additional content from that ongoing, and then you get to do what you love to do, which is build your business and further your own mission as a business.
Man, this was incredibly insightful. I've owned an agency for 23 years, and I feel like I just went to advanced 401 class on branding. So incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for your time, Marc. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for the awesome questions. And as you know, I love to nerd out about this anytime. So anytime you want to talk about any of this, I would love to do so.